Happy Tuesday morning to everybody. I wanted to come out this morning and talk a little bit about TikTok and its future and where it is and where it's going and all that kind of fun stuff, along with this sovereign wealth question. So, TikTok, as we all know, was banned for about 18 hours. And then it came back to life very quickly. And the whole point was that the Chinese government has to divest itself of its ownership stake in TikTok, or it's going to be banned from the U.S. forever. Blah blah blah. Um, the So it's still got something like 65 days before it could be banned again, and there's still a bunch of people out there trying to bid on it, including Mr. Beast, which I think is kind of funny. But it This thing kept popped up on my newsfeed this morning because owning a social media company, which I do, I pay attention to these things. By the way, I'm the last person you should ever take investment advice from, but let's take a look at what I'm talking about here, because this might be a worse idea than what TikTok currently is. So, Trump signed an executive order, and this is not a Trump bashing exercise. Both political parties are off the rails, in my opinion. If you want to bash one party or the other, go ahead and do it. I don't care, but I'm more about the action than the party. I don't care. And by the way, any group of people that calls themselves a party is really not out for my best interest, in my personal opinion. Trump signs order establishing a sovereign wealth fund that says he could buy TikTok. That he says could buy TikTok. President Donald Trump signed an executive order that outlines plans for the government-run sovereign wealth fund to serve as an economic development tool, perhaps be used to buy TikTok. Now, a couple things here. The Constitution of the United States gives the power of the purse or power to spend money over to Congress. I don't think you can do this one. But let's set that aside for a second. The idea of the U.S., such a U.S. fund has been brought up before. They are generally used by smaller nations with vast natural resources as well as fiscal surpluses to deploy. What that means in English is people like the Saudis, which the Saudi has a sovereign wealth fund, who have run government surpluses forever, put that money into a fund so that they can accumulate interest or, some return on your investment. And then you don't have to tax people. A good idea, actually. A rational idea to do, right? So you've got natural resources, you've got budget surpluses, throw it in a fund. That fund draws interest, that fund has a return on investment. You don't have to tax people. I'm behind that 100%. Here's the problem. We're not in the point of running a surplus. So really, if you're going to start a fund, you're doing it with debt, not with surplus. That's a bit of a weird situation. So he signed this executive order, which, by the way, executive orders have no force and effect of law. They're just executive orders, that outlines plans for a government-run sovereign wealth fund to serve as an economic development tool and perhaps be used to buy TikTok. Here's where I have an issue. TikTok is essentially the place a lot of people go to get news and different information on what's going on throughout the day. Whether or not you agree TikTok should be the place people go to get their information is a different story. I understood. There are people that do it. Now, that is a weird thing for the government to own essentially a media outlet. I don't know that that's ever happened in the history of the United States. It happens in other countries, but it's always used for just propagandist garbage. Pravda, a few others that have popped up over the years. Anyway, among aims for the fund would be developing infrastructure such as airports, highways, and could help extend influences to areas such as Panama and Greenland. That's all good stuff, right? It all sounds good on paper, but again, paper and execution are a big problem. So we're going to stand this thing up within the next 12 months. I'm telling you, it takes an act of Congress to do that. The president, I don't see a way the president can do this in a vacuum. We're going to monetize the asset side of the U.S. balance sheet for the American people. If you translate this one to English, what I think that means is the government owns a bunch of office buildings they're not using. What that could mean is they could rent those out and monetize that asset, or it could mean they sell it and lease it back. That particular sentence is a little wonky. We're going to monetize the asset side of the U.S. balance sheet for the American people. Now, taking an empty office building and leasing it, I get, but does that mean just that, or does that mean, hey, we'll lend you our Air Force if you pay us enough, right? I mean that's a weird sentence, very vague. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said during Media Parlay, there will be a combination of liquid assets that we have in this country as we work to bring this to the American people. Now, this monetized asset side of the balance sheet, I mean, if we got assets that are sitting there, doing nothing, and you can get some lease money out of it, okay, fine. But I really want to know more of what that means. And this buying TikTok thing, that has direct implications on my business base, and that's just bizarre. So this whole thing rambles on, but yeah, it talks about Norway's sovereign wealth fund and others. But this is the part that really gets me. There are funds involved in global finance markets through investments. These funds are involved in global finance markets through investments in stocks, bonds, and real estate, along with stakes in infrastructure and private equity. So what he's saying is he wants to take federal funds and invest them in things like stocks, bonds, and real estate, which essentially would allow the government to prop up markets or manipulate them in ways that I think is not what a free market economy is really about. Now, let's back up to the TikTok question a minute. So, because they actually, he does say you could buy TikTok. Okay, you got like 60 days left on the ticker before TikTok needs to, come up with some other solution. And our government owning a social media site that has a bunch of people reporting news and stuff on it just seems to me like it's kind of weird. I mean, that's the thing we complained about with TikTok, right? And where does that right to privacy where does that line get drawn? Where do we say, okay, this is private, this is public, this is not, And let's say the FBI is, part of the federal government, and, they're going to start using it to surveil people. Do they need a warrant? I mean, if the government owns TikTok and they want to look at what I'm doing, okay, maybe my TikTok's public, maybe it's not, but, it seems to me like there's some lines here getting crossed that are just wonky. And this last sentence or last paragraph of hey, I can go invest in stocks, bonds, and real estate. The government can, and critics are saying lack of transparency can lead to conflicts and corruption if there is not strict governance rules. Well, if you're doing an investment, the last thing you want to do is like I work in the startup space, right? So we keep a lot of things very private right up until the very last second. We don't tell anybody exactly what's going on right up until it's time. Otherwise, competition comes in. So investment sometimes means keep a secret for a while. That's why you have the SEC, and you can only release information on your stock share, your stock results at a particular time. And if you trade on non-public information, you get in trouble, right? So Congress does this all the time. They trade on insider information because they're exempt from insider trading laws. Ha ha, go figure. Does the sovereign wealth fund, if one exists, get to trade on insider information that we don't have? Or does it get to only trade on public information? And how do you make sure that actually takes place? There's a lot of weird stuff in this one that just drives me up a wall. And buying TikTok and having it owned, at least even in part, by the federal government, I think is a gigantic mistake, if for no other reason than the privacy concerns. And somewhere, it wasn't in this article, but somewhere else, he said, TikTok could be worth almost $1 trillion. But yeah, it's only because of the algorithm. And ByteDance isn't going to let go of the algorithm unless you pay them an actual $1 trillion. And who wants to see $1 trillion of federal funds go to China? I don't want to see that. We're running enough debt. So, the sovereign wealth fund has been pushed by people before. It'll be pushed by people again. I don't know. This is a bad idea. I don't want government ownership of a social media site. I think it could lend itself to a lot of shenanigans that we don't currently see. I think the concept of a sovereign wealth fund is great, only if it is truly, truly, truly operating on the same sets of rules that you and I have when we try to invest in things. And by the way, I'm the last person you should ever take investment advice from, but at least I want a level playing field, right? They shouldn't get insider information. I shouldn't get insider information. We should have a level playing field. But, yeah, you have to have a surplus before that takes place, because if you don't, you're just using debt dollars. And a wealth fund is really there to make sure you tax people less. So let's say the wealth fund starts doing well. Do we get taxed less? And let's say the wealth fund does so well that they need no tax dollars, and the government actually runs a massive surplus coming out of the wealth fund. Do we get a share of that? I mean, is that how that works? I think we need some details on this, and including the details on the TikTok thing. We need to know more. But on its surface, this looks like about the worst idea since Greedo shooting first. So I don't know. Love to hear your thoughts. Drop me a line on any of the social sites. I'm always around. But to me, this seems like a colossally bad idea for the U.S. federal government to try to buy a social media site. It lends itself to what's next, buying different media outlets and controlling that narrative. Bad things, I think, could come out of it. Free speech needs to stay free. You may not agree with somebody's speech, but at least it needs to stay free. And this is a very slippery slope. Everybody have a great day. If you have questions, if you see any information on this, please drop it my direction. I'm trying to follow this one closely. I'll talk to everybody soon.